Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a video for you about this little guy right here. This is the Herman Knives B. That's right, not the Sting, but the whole B this time. Very interesting little piece, and one that I'm very glad I got to take a look at. First off, though, before we jump into the disassembly and quick review, I want to let you guys know that this guy was provided to me as a loaner by Polish Custom Knives. Reached out to me, said, "Hey Nick, you want to check out the new model?" And I am a big fan of Herman at this point. I think he's one of the best knife makers working, and so I said, yes, of course, I would very much be happy to, and especially given that it's a smaller knife. Oh yes. Oh, yes, oh, yes. So, I said, of course, but as always, I told them I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. Might be a gem, might be junk. They still did send it along. Nonetheless, we do have to assume this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my best not to let that affect the nature or the quality of my review. Next thing, let's go ahead and do some size comparison real quick. We have ourselves here a Spyderco Delica, and so what we see here is actually this isn't in the handle any bigger than Delica. It's not a big knife in that way. The blade has more length than the Delica, just a little tiny bit, right? But it is a round Delica size. Here it is next to the Ontario Rat number 2, and again, it's right in that size range. And here it is against the Spyderco PM2. What we're going to see here is, B is not big. And then I actually want to throw it up against a couple of other Herman knives, just to make that clear. Here is the Sting. So we can see that the Sting here is bigger than the B, which actually is generally true of Bs and Stings. That's fun. Here it is against the Micro Sting, which is indeed actually a little bit smaller, not actually a lot smaller. The blade is smaller, but the handle is really just not that far off. Right? The amount of difference in handle here is not big. And so this is a much more efficient design in terms of the amount of blade in a given chunk of handle. Here it is against the Vespatilio, which is another smaller Herman piece. And in many ways, I feel like the B is it feels like it's sort of a refinement on the Vespatilio design. It does, Vespatilio, that is, does have some Batarang feeling to it that I am personally a little bit in favor of. But that's the thing, and then I guess finally I probably should just throw it up against the other two models here. We have right here our Mantis Ishtar. And we can see is a very small knife relative to those guys. So anyways, let's go on ahead and jump into it. But actually, first off, one little note here. This knife, as it's sitting here on the table, is about $800 shipped. Plus or minus exchange rates, whatever. But it's in that ballpark, so it's a lot of money. If that's a problem for you, well, sorry about that. But I'm doing my best to show people who I think are doing really, really good work. But actually, as I prepare for the disassembly here, what I want to do is share with you something that the Herman Knives people, well, Polish Custom Knives, said to me. They basically asked me to give you all a bit of a warning. And basically what they are asking is do not disassemble. In their words, via Instagram, your knife disassemblies have become iconic. Oh, that's certainly a way to put it. In the knife community, I have a request. Please convey to your audience that disassembling Herman knives requires knowledge and skill. We do not actually encourage people to disassemble their knives in everyday use. There's no need for it because the entire knife and open bearings can be cleaned with warm water and dish soap, blown dry with air, lubricated, and the knife will be as good as new. All screws are secured with thread locker. I know you always use thread locker, but we've had instances where people disassemble their knives, don't use thread locker, and then blame us for it later. Now, look, I am going to be honest with you here. I am always an advocate of companies allowing people to disassemble their stuff, but in a lot of ways that strikes a good tone for me, right? Because what they're not saying, if you disassemble your knife, your warranty is void. What they're saying is, hey, be careful, jackass. And you know what? I'm totally here for that. You should be careful anytime you're disassembling anything on the higher end. I've done this a fair amount. I'm still bad at it, right? But nonetheless, this is a thing. The other thing that they pointed out is that this has a different approach to bearings now that is new to Herman. And it makes it particularly dangerous to over-tighten the pivot. They're using a new pivot with a smaller thread pitch, which means apparently that it is very possible that you can crack the ceramic bearings. As they say, a smaller thread pitch provides greater precision, comes with a trade-off. It increases the pressure on the ceramic bearings and carbide washers. Please be careful to tighten the pivot only to the point where blade play stops and no tighter. Otherwise, you could result in the cracking of the ceramic ball's sintered carbide washer. And so that's new, that's different. And so we're going to be very careful about that. The other thing that's new and different is this guy, and actually I guess I'll just show you the box here. This comes in a little box here. This is not their wooden, high-end display boxes, but that's kind of cool. And it comes here with actually a screwdriver. And they say that it is actually the screwdriver that is machined in-house by Herman Knives, which is kind of cool looking, right? And it also comes with a Polish lubricant, which is called Hugh Pruchiak. I'm not sure. Protect-A-Glide for Herman Knives. So we'll go on ahead and use that. It is proudly indeed made in Poland, so we'll let them make it in Poland, right? And we'll use that as we are doing our disassembly here today. So, anyways, there's a lot of... Whoa there. So I'm throwing things everywhere. There's a whole lot there, right? But, at its core, I think makers should be able to say something like, hey, it's a little dangerous to take this guy apart. And at some level, one could argue that having something that is vulnerable to that kind of damage is a little bit of a demerit on it. But at another level, you know what? Okay. Right? Makers are allowed to do that, and the way that they're doing that is respectful to the community. So, whatever. Okay, so now that they've told us not to take it apart, let's go on ahead and take it apart. What I'm going to do is use, looks like all I'm going to need to take out are these 3 screws in the back and this pivot right here. So I'll start off with the screws in the back here. We will go on ahead and do that. And if you're curious about any of the tools I'm using, go to nickshabazz.com/tools, or in this case, Herman Knives. So that's a thing. Can I get these screws out without removing the pocket clip? Does it matter? Is the pocket clip going to keep these screws captive, which is not the end of the world either? This one should come out on its own. We're going to see. That may be sufficient. I don't know whether I've fully disengaged from the titanium on the other side. Yeah, it feels disengaged. Disengaged. That one's still a little engaged. Let's loosen things up a bit. There we go. All right, and now I'm going to gently release the tension on the pivot here. Come on. This Torx hole on the other side is a little shallow, right? There's not a lot of depth to it. That is definitely not something I'm in love with. You can see, or feel that is, that they've used a lot of thread locker here. It's kind of a gummy thread locker. That's fine. But the tool is working. I mean, obviously it's a T20 bit, so it freaking better work. But it's a very gummy thread locker. So it's really kind of requiring a fair bit of torque every step of the way here. And just a little bit more here. Wow. This is a unique thread lock. Interesting. Or maybe it's that thread pitch. Oh, yeah, look at that. This is well saturated with something. But either way, the knife is now apart, and the bearings here are pulled out. Now, one question that I have here, you can see they're using a different bearing race design. One of the questions I have here that I kind of hope I don't find the answer out to is, are the bearings still loose? It looks like they may actually be caged now, because prior Hermans have had loose bearings in there. And that's always been a bit of a pain in the neck for disassembly, right? Yeah, sintered carbide washers. That looks like that for sure. Interesting. But yeah, so it looks like these bearings are now captive, meaning that the little balls aren't going to fall out of the little holes as you are taking the guy apart. And if that's the case, then that's a lovely upgrade, honestly. All is forgiven. So let's go ahead and clean this guy out. This guy has actually gotten a decent bit of carry, right? They loaned it my way, but made clear that I could, do a review, carry it, etc. I've tried to keep it in very nice shape and whatnot, but it has gotten a fair bit of carry because, honestly, I really like the knife a lot. It's pretty damn solid. And in fact, I will be ordering one of my own in a different configuration once this review is filmed. Don't want to talk to them about that before the review is filmed because, that, I don't know, could feel a little dirty to me. Anyways, so, yeah, this kind of cleaned up right nicely. I'll want to clean off the pivot here, clean off the lock bar. I'm going to grab a little Q-tip here, soak it in some rubbing alcohol, and use that to clean this off. Interesting. And do the same thing over here, although this side ain't so dirty. And then what I'll do is I'll put a little bit more booze on it and then slide the Q-tip into the pivot here itself. Now what we're going to do, I can't talk, but the internet's been telling me that for years now, so nothing's new. We can see here that it is not a free spinning pivot. It is in fact machined on the other side. That's normal for Herman these days. Herman Knives has come a long way. That's not to say that they were ever making bad stuff. In fact, my first experience with them was kind of startlingly good. Like, who the hell are these guys and where did they come out of? But they've continued raising their own internal bar, and I really respect that. Right? The fact that Herman probably at this point is at the stage where, you know, he's far enough ahead of a lot of the competition that he could just kind of keep doing what he's doing. But instead is continuing to push forward, continuing to improve things, and improve things that sort of don't, like, okay, for instance, a nice example of the captive bearing. And by the way, I don't want to sound like I'm just like fluffing Herman up here. I mean, I'll talk a little bit later about some of the things I don't like here. Mostly the price, let's be real. But I'm actually quite impressed that they went through and completely redid the bearing system when, you know, their basic take is like, hey, you shouldn't disassemble this knife. Like, that would make a lot of sense for them to at some point just say, like, yeah, don't, just no. And, you know, not even bother. And I respect the fact that they're trying to make it better even for the people who are doing the thing that they say the people don't need to do. So, yeah, it's neat. All right, a lot of respect for them. Them here being Herman and Polish Custom Knives. This thread locker is very gunky. It kind of feels like as I'm cleaning it off here, I'll use the more alcohol-y one of these. Feels like as I'm cleaning it off, what I'm actually doing is letting it kind of ball up. It feels like it's got kind of the consistency of a rubber cement, which is not out of line, right? I've seen thread locker kind of like this before. But I think the really fine thread pitch, and it is very, very fine here, combined with that gunky thread locker, made for a very, very slow withdrawal experience. And given the shallowness of the screw there, that's a little bit less than ideal. So that would be one piece of feedback, is I'd like to see the screws a little bit deeper, right? So you can engage deeper with the tool and get a little bit of a better shot there. Okay, so I think we're actually ready to put this little guy back together. This is, so far, and I mean famous last words, but so far this has actually been one of the more kind Herman disassemblies because of those captive bearings, which I now really do believe are captive. I don't, every prior Herman knife I would have lost a bearing by now. So, like, that's great. That's an improvement. But I'll go ahead and I'll pop the pivot in here. I'm going to go on ahead and use my Q, is that a Je Prusiak, on there. Maybe it's a Spider. Sorry, my Polish isn't, actually, is what my Polish is. This is a ridiculous thing I'm about to say, but do I recognize the smell of this lubricant? I'm going to put a little bit on my... No, that doesn't smell like any lubricant I've tried before. I swear I'm not just like huffing on screen here. At this point, I have used enough different knife lubricants that I have come to be able to recognize a lot of, like, oh yeah, this is... But no, this is it's its own little thing. It does smell different than any of the other ones I've tried. So I went ahead and I did put a little bit of lubrication on the bearing, I'm sorry, on the surface in the back there, as well as around the pivot there. Then I'm just slapping this bearing in place. I'm going to gently use a little tool here to rotate that bearing around, which will hopefully distribute some of that lubricant onto the bearing itself. Beautiful. I'm also going to put a little bit of lubrication onto your detent ball here, because that'll help smooth the action out further. Pivot is in place. That's lovely. Okay. What am I forgetting to do here? Once I go further, it's going to be a pain for me to put on thread locker in the back. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to do that now. And I'm using this little thread locker on a stick. I could have taken these screws out, but I don't really feel like I needed to. So here's what I'm going to do instead. Like, I could just, like, that probably onto there. That's the technical term, of course. But instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this little watch spring bar tool here. I'm just going to put a little bit onto it, and then I'm just going to use it to kind of apply some thread locker directly to the threads. And like so, and like so. And this should allow me to be, to get enough thread locker in there to stick, but without coating the tip of it and whatnot in the thread locker here. For this guy, actually this guy I can just do my normal sort of thing. That should work. Get us plenty of thread locker. I'm using, of course, Loctite on a stick here. Lovely thing. Okay, so now what I can do is I can put the bearing there. Do I need to over lubricate the pivot itself? Probably not. I'd say it's good to go. I am gonna go on ahead, put just a little bit more on here. Don't need this, but then again, if they're advertising that you can just clean it out with soap and water and then just pour lubricant in, then clearly they're not worried about over lubrication either. So, you know, hey, match made in heaven, right? That's a reference to the fact that I am Exxon Shabazz and put oil on everything. Not like sea creatures and such, but that was an Exxon Valdez reference. Kids, ask your parents, or Wikipedia for that matter. All right, and I believe at this stage, yeah, what the heck? I'm gonna go on ahead and put the other scale on here. All right, now what I want to do here is sneak up on this pivot. They are telling me quite strongly that I need to be careful as I put this pivot in place. And you know what? I'm going to listen to them. And with the fine thread pitch here, that makes a lot of sense. What I'm going to do first is actually go against the, I'm going counterclockwise, well, yeah, counterclockwise here. I'm going lefty-loosey. And that's allowing, and I'm doing this now for show. I've already dropped in there. He says, I'm doing this for show. Then I drop the freaking screw. But what I'm doing here is turning it until it kind of falls into the hole to make sure that my threads are in alignment, right? Because if I'm going to, you know, the last thing I want to do is cross-thread this. So, okay, there we go. This is going in pretty smoothly right now. That's nice. Way smoother than it came out. Right now, I am just getting this a little tiny bit tight. Like I'm basically going until I feel, okay, there I felt a little resistance, so I backed it off. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this, and I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to tighten these screws back here. So I'm going to tighten that up here. I'm going to tighten this up here. And I'm going to tighten this up here. This was the easiest Herman disassemblies. Okay, maybe I should not say that until I'm done. Okay, I know that my pivot here is fully seated on the back side. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pop it open. I'm going to have blade play right now. Yeah, I have substantial blade play. That's because the pivot is too loose. So now what I'm going to go on ahead and do is tighten the pivot a little bit. And I have just brought it to the point where I'm feeling friction. Right, where I am feeling the pivot slow down. I can tell the pivot is too loose here because the blade here is not centered. And I can feel it there too. But I'll flip it anyways. Yes, I have substantial side-to-side blade play. When I wiggle the knife in my hand, this blade wants to move independently of the handle. So that means it's too loose. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to tighten this up a little bit more. And I am using a tiny amount of torque here. They have told me specifically to be careful, so I am being careful. Right now, I felt that it is still too loose, so I'm tightening. Okay, where are we at? We have a little bit of blade play still, but it feels a lot better, right? We can see we're still actually a little off-center too, so that's another good sign that I'm not quite where I need to be. Okay, now, for the first time, I have actually felt sort of an increase in resistance still, right? Where I was first spinning, it was basically free. Then it slowed down, which means, okay, I'm now pushing things together. Now, for the first time, it actually kind of wanted to really slow down. So I didn't apply further force. Holy crap. Yeah. There is no longer any blade play in this knife. It is incredibly solid now. And Yeah, that's good to go. What I'm going to do here actually is I could probably stop, but I'm going to loosen it actually just a touch and see whether there is still no blade play. Wow. Okay. And the action is a touch better. I'm going to loosen it just a little bit more. I did not anticipate the amount of difference. I'm sorry, the tiny amount of difference that is required. Is there play or am I making that up? Okay, little tiniest bit. I am making little micro adjustments here. Like watch the change in the top of it there. I can totally see right now, having done this, how having that really fine pitch is going to mean that you need to really sneak up on this. Because I was trying to sneak, and it still jumped out at me, right? Like, this thing, you have to have lots of points invested in stealth, right, in order to sneak up on this pivot. So I find myself agreeing wholeheartedly with them. Be careful as you take this knife apart, because you really want to go little tiny, little tiny, little tiny, little tiny, till the blade play's gone. I don't know, actually. I mean, obviously, I could put the thing in there and just honk on it and crack all the bearings and be like, yep, they were right. I'm not gonna, though. That seems crappy to do. But I can totally see how what they're saying, this has an unusually responsive pivot. Like, it's nothing, 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 something, and then you are 3 degrees away from, I don't know about disaster, but it makes sense why they're saying what they're saying. So, but we're done. This is now in a very nice shape. The blade is centered. Let's see here. I'm just gonna, now that I've got everything in place, I'm gonna loosen these little back guys a little bit more, just to give everything a chance to settle out. And now retighten, retighten, and retighten. And actually, that helped a little bit, I think. Oh, yeah, the action got a little nicer. This can happen if you've got kind of not exactly the right sort of geometry between all the parts here. The knife, oh, boy. Oh, yes, that's a nice action. That's good. That's real good. Okay, yeah. So we're done. And that was the easiest Herman disassembly ever. Like I said, you need to be careful. And that's a commentary on past Herman disassemblies, not a commentary on how easy this was. Right? But you do want to be careful. I'm going to completely validate what they said there. I can totally see why they are a little bit concerned and why somebody who is not being very cautious in how they tighten things up could end up causing some trouble. But that said, the results are good, and this lubrication seems to work great in it. So that's nice. You can tell it's a well-polished product. Okay. Anyways, so now let's actually look at the knife and think a little bit about my thoughts on it. Like I said, I've carried this, right? I got full permission to carry it, even despite being a loner. And there's a lot of nice things about this. The action is sweet. It's a very, very nice action. Herman has a lot of advantages in action. Very, very good at dialing into tense lock bars. Because it is the lock bar is not on the outside, you have a very consistent flipping force. This has always been a thing, and relative to a more conventional frame lock, like, for instance, do I not have a frame lock on the table? Oh my God. Really? The world is changing. It's amazing. Okay. Come here, frame lock. Here we go. Spyderco Sleeve Bully. This is a conventional frame lock, and you can see the lock bar is on the outside. So if you are putting your fingers against that lock bar, you will slow down the action, or just because you're adding more detent pressure. Here, that's not a problem. So the action here is very sweet. This is also very nice in the hand. I have relatively small hands, right? That is a running meme for years now, right? But I have little hands there, and for me, this is really great. And in fact, it is arguably better in the hand than the Micro Sting. For me, this actually works really well too. But for instance, one of my best friends is a very large human with very large hands, and when I handed this to him, he'd commented that he felt it was nice in his hand too, right? And so obviously he'd probably prefer, and in fact he does prefer. He freaking EDCs. Come here, Mantis. Where are you at? EDC's a freaking mantis, so like, yeah, he prefers larger things, but it's definitely a thing. So if you are a person of large hand, then you're absolutely going to prefer a knife this size and with this shape relative to like the Micro Sting. I will also say that the Vespatilio is not something I would consider in light of the B. I think the B is in many ways, although the Vespatilio has its own aesthetic, it really does feel like a more refined and more interesting Vespatilio. I don't know that I would send somebody here when this is a thing, right? Unless the price differential is pretty big, I would really send you here. This is just much more ergonomic. Just frankly, a lot nicer. It's a really well done thing. And then, finally, I mean, dude, it's a knife, so the blade is great. Herman is really good at blades, right? This is an M398. Which is a steel that is at least as good or better than M390 by pretty much every measure. And the heat treat from Herman I've had has been very, very good previously, but it comes down to a very nice thin edge, very nice thin tip. This knife cuts like crazy, as Herman stuff usually does, and so as a result, this is a really great practical pocket knife. I'm a big, big fan of it there. And so, honestly, my impression of this is very positive. This is a great knife. I think I prefer the aesthetic of the Micro Sting a little bit, but it may also just be my own bias because this particular color scheme and layout is not speaking to me at all. Once I actually get one of these guys, a B, in the color schemes that I would prefer, this is good. This is real good. There are two things though that are a little bit problematic here. So this is a base model knife, right? Herman's base model is about $800 for this. That's a lot for a base model. At that point, it's not much base of anything, right? It's an acid model. That's a joke. Of course, technically, this is an acid model because of the etching. Anyways, I digress. Sorry, I'm a little basic joke there. So, anyways, I was very happy to see a base model from Herman because it's been a long time since I did, right? My first Sting review was a relatively basic Herman. But it's interesting. It's a great knife. Like, I want to be very clear. I have very few practical things to say about the knife. But one thing I will say is that I think that Herman is at his best. And I would like you to I'm going to go on ahead and acknowledge that I'm saying this from a very privileged perspective, right? Somebody who is in the high end of knife collecting. And I completely acknowledge that it's a little bit insane to say the thing that I'm about to say. So, you know, as you were getting ready to make angry comments, please keep that proviso in mind. But I really feel like actually Herman is at his best when he is doing the more complex builds, when he's doing the more complex arrangements, right? You know, something closer to this or to this, right? Because in a lot of ways, Herman makes amazing knives no matter what. It's an amazing knife. But Herman's skill level with doing the high-end stuff, with doing the dressy-looking stuff, with doing the mirror polishes, the Timascus, etc., is really high up there, right? And Herman, I feel like, shines best in that world. These knives feel really exceptional, even, but like, okay, I'll throw the Mantis out here too. This is a really, really exceptional knife. It stands out very, very prominently among the world of high-end knives, right? This is the kind of thing that shows me that Herman is among the best knife makers in practice today, right? The base model Herman, on the other hand, is a great knife. But in a lot of ways, it doesn't really feel like it's letting Herman do what Herman does best, right? The base model gives you a great pocket knife that cuts well. And if you are planning to, you know, spend all day breaking down boxes, or if you would never contemplate carrying something that is a little bit fancier, right? This was in my pocket this past week, right? If you would never contemplate carrying something fancy, whether due to budget or just the way that your constitution is built, so to speak, then obviously a base model is really the way to go. A knife that you would never carry is, well, there's a lot to be said about that. But nonetheless, I feel like in a lot of ways, though, if you are going to go Herman, it might actually benefit you to go higher end. It might benefit you to go to the place where Herman is at his best, right? This is not bad, but these are better. And more importantly, and again, this is a dumb take, because it boils down to like spend more than $800 if you're going to spend $800. But I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that maybe spending a few $100s more is going to get you something that is way more than a few $100s more impressive, right? This is a knife that is relatively far up the curve of diminishing returns, right? This feels like a knife that is way at the top of its game. You are still way even further up the curve of diminishing returns, but basically as you spend a little bit more, I feel like you get something that feels more exceptional in the knife market. And so if you are thinking about spending this ridiculous amount of money on a pocket knife, A, oh my God, who hurt you? What's wrong? But B, you don't have to tell me in the comments. That's okay. But B, I would actually consider you to think, or encourage you to think about considering maybe holding off a little bit longer and going for one of the even higher end models, because you're probably going to end up with something that is even more outstanding feeling. Because, and you will get something that I think for the extra amount of money will feel that much more impressive. More importantly, it kind of reveals the fact that I feel like, and this is maybe a different way to say what I just said, the base model pricing feels a little up there, right? You are obviously way up the curve of diminishing returns anytime you are in these high-end single artisan sort of knives, right? It is worth remembering that Herman Knives is made by a dude named Herman. And so as a result, it's like, this is an artist that you're supporting over there in Poland, right? And so for a lot of people, myself included, that means something. That is important. That is a thing we should do. But the fact is, especially if you're looking at a knife sort of in this trim level, right, that's not trying to be full dress, that's not showing off the things that, Herman is capable of that most makers really aren't, although arguably the precision, the action here, that's still way above and beyond, right? This would still be a really impressive knife at any knife show. But arguably, you could get two knives that are, like Chinese factory knives that are probably 95% as nice for the price of one of these guys, right? If you are wanting two knives that are titanium, that's anodized with a nice sweet action, this is better, but it's not that much better. This is the curve of diminishing returns in action, right? And so, in a lot of ways, I feel like the base model feels maybe a little bit higher. And I would kind of maybe encourage them to see if they can bring that down a little bit, because right now in this trim level, it's really just not as impressive relative to the competition as some of their higher end stuff, where they're really showing off is. Like, even though you pay a lot more for this, in some ways it feels like you get a lot more for it. And so the base model here is a great knife, and obviously you should be, if you pick one of these guys up, you should be proud of it. It's still one of the better knives out there. And again, I don't want to sound like a simp here, but I also feel like they could probably drop that base model price down a little bit, or just have Herman focus more on things that are a little bit fancier, even if the price has to say the same. So that would, I think, be my chief criticism here. The knife itself, physically, is amazing. And also, I'm going to be real with you, I don't care for this particular color scheme, right? Orange and purple is not my scene, particularly. I'm sure some folks love it. But, the knife itself is absolutely amazing, but I would sure love to see the price come down a little bit, especially on something that is a base model, and especially when I've seen over and over and have purchased over and over what Herman can do on that higher end. And so I think that's going to be my conclusion on it. The B model is great. I like this model a lot, and frankly, I think it's going to be a great choice for a lot of folks because, for instance, the blade is just right in that good length for a lot of people. It's just a hair over 3 inches, which legally is a pain in the, like, depending on whether the cop likes you or not, this is over 3 inches. It's under 8 centimeters at least, but nonetheless, this is it's a great little model. I think it'll work well for a lot of people. It'll be a great choice. It'll be a great choice. But I think the price is just the question. And I think if you're going to think Herman, you might even think going a little bit higher end, because you're going to get something that is a little bit more impressive for certainly more money. But I think it pays off in a very weird way. So I hope that's helpful, right? I am a total jerk for saying, no, pay more than $800 for a knife. Like, I fully acknowledge that. The ridiculousness is on full display here. But what I will say is that, like I said, it is a great knife. Well done, Herman. And I actually, sorry, I'm feeling disorganized here, but the difference of that disassembly just soaked in a little bit, right? The disassembly, okay, I would encourage you to go watch the disassembly for, the Mantis or something like that, right? Or even worse, one of the earliest Stings. where, oh my God, is it a pain in the neck, right? There are two screws you have to undo that are underneath the pocket clip, and all the bearings are free, and it's using, some of the early ones even had a proprietary pivot on there. It was like, Herman has come a long way in terms of disassembly, and even though I agree with them that you should probably be careful before you set out to disassemble this guy for the reasons, well, they asked me to talk about, this is way, way better. This is the best and easiest Herman disassembly I've had yet. And that's also kind of, it's like saying, this is the absolute best flue I've ever had. Like, yeah, it still kind of sucks a little. But they've made leaps and bounds here, right? And so the captive bearings and whatnot, and that's improvement they didn't necessarily have to make, especially if their policy is you probably don't need to take the knife apart. So I really do appreciate and respect that. So Herman, well done. This is another really nice model. And folks who are interested, look, you can get a lot of knife for $800. Not going to sit here and tell you otherwise, right? And you can get even more knife if you go a little bit higher in Herman's collection. But if you are looking for something that is a pretty nice little choice in a very nice little size range with a sweet little action here, and oddly enough, much improved disassembly, then by God, this little bee might sting your heart with joy. That's not how stinging generally works. Sorry, that pun really stung. Get it like stunk, except stung. No? All right. I'll stop before you come out in hives. Okay, hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.